The creak of a floorboard jolted me awake. In the pitch-black room, my heart raced as I strained my ears, hoping I'd imagined the sound. But there it was again, the unmistakable shuffle of feet. I'd only been in Bangkok for 2 days, and this was my first night at the Happy Elephant Hostel. The place had seemed friendly enough when I checked in earlier that afternoon. The staff were welcoming, and I'd even shared a few beers with my roommates in the common area before turning in early to fight off my lingering jet lag. Now, as I lay frozen in my bunk, I cursed myself for choosing the bottom bed. The curtain that offered a modicum of privacy suddenly felt like a flimsy barrier between me and whoever, or whatever, was moving around our room. I held my breath, trying to quiet the pounding in my chest. My eyes, adjusting to the darkness, could make out vague shapes in the room. The bunk across from me was empty. Where was Klaus, the German backpacker I'd met earlier? Another footstep, closer this time. I wanted to call out, to ask who was there, but fear had stolen my voice. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe it was just Klaus returning from a late-night excursion. But wouldn't he use his phone's flashlight? And why was he being so quiet? The hostel had seemed secure. We needed key cards to enter the building and again for our room. Had someone managed to sneak in behind a guest? Or worse, had they obtained a key card somehow? I thought of my backpack, sitting on the floor next to my bunk. It contained everything: my passport, wallet, laptop. I should have used a locker. Why hadn't I used a locker? The footsteps stopped. Whoever it was, they were close, too close. I could hear soft breathing now, just on the other side of my curtain. My whole body tensed, muscles coiled and ready to spring into action, though I had no idea what I'd do if the curtain suddenly flew open. Seconds stretched into an eternity as I waited, every nerve on high alert. Then, so softly I almost missed it, I heard the sound of a zipper. My backpack. They were going through my stuff. Anger surged through me, momentarily overpowering my fear. This was everything I owned, everything I needed for my year-long trip around Southeast Asia. I couldn't just lie here and let some thief take it all. I took a deep, silent breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. In one swift motion, I yanked back the curtain and lunged forward, my hand shooting out to grab whoever was there. My fingers closed around fabric, and I heard a startled gasp. Without thinking, I pulled hard, and a body came crashing down onto my bunk. In the darkness, we grappled, limbs tangling as I tried to subdue the intruder while they fought to break free. Help! I finally found my voice, shouting as loud as I could. Thief! Someone help! The person beneath me was smaller than I'd expected, and as we struggled, a familiar scent hit me. The flowery shampoo I'd noticed earlier when, Sarah, I loosened my grip, confusion replacing my panic. What the hell? The girl from the bunk above mine stopped fighting. Get off me, you psycho, she hissed. Scrambling backward, I fumbled for my phone, fingers shaking as I turned on the flashlight. Sarah squinted in the sudden brightness, her blonde hair a tangled mess around her face. She looked terrified, and for a moment, I felt a pang of guilt for attacking her. But then I remembered why I'd reacted that way in the first place. What were you doing? I demanded. Why were you going through my bag? Sarah's expression shifted from fear to defiance. I wasn't going through your bag, she snapped. I was looking for my book. I think I dropped it earlier and thought it might have fallen near your bunk. It was a plausible explanation, but something didn't add up. In the dark? Without a light? And what was that zipper sound I heard? She rolled her eyes. That was probably my jacket. I got cold. I wasn't buying it. Where's Klaus? I asked, suddenly remembering our missing roommate. A flicker of something, worry, guilt, passed over Sarah's face. How should I know? I'm not his keeper. Just then, the door to our room flew open. Light from the hallway spilled in, momentarily blinding me. I turned off my phone's flashlight as 2 of the hostel staff rushed in, followed closely by a handful of curious guests who'd apparently been woken by the commotion. What's going on here? a burly man I recognized as the night manager demanded. His eyes darted between Sarah and me, taking in our disheveled appearances and the mess of tangled sheets on my bunk. "I caught her going through my stuff," I said, pointing at Sarah. "That's not true," Sarah protested. "He attacked me for no reason. I was just looking for my book." The night manager held up his hands. All right. Let's take this outside. We don't want to wake the whole hostel." As we filed into the hallway, I noticed several faces peeking out from neighboring rooms. Great. So much for keeping a low profile on my first night. The night manager led us down to the common area, which was mercifully empty at this hour. As Sarah and I took seats on opposite ends of a worn-out couch, I couldn't help but notice she was keeping her left hand hidden in the pocket of her jacket. "Now," the manager said, his tone stern but not unkind. "Let's hear what happened, one at a time." I recounted my version of events, describing how I'd woken up to strange noises and caught Sarah near my backpack. Sarah stuck to her story about the book, insisting she'd done nothing wrong and that I'd overreacted. "Do you have any proof she was trying to steal from you?" the manager asked me. I hesitated. I was certain of what I'd heard and felt, but I had to admit there was no hard evidence. "No," I said reluctantly, "but I know what I heard, and why was she creeping around in the dark?" The manager turned to Sarah. "Miss, can you show us this book you were looking for?" Sarah's face paled slightly. I couldn't find it. That's why I was still looking when he grabbed me." Something about her demeanor made me even more suspicious. Acting on a hunch, I turned to the manager. "Can you ask her to empty her pockets?" Sarah's eyes widened. "What? No, you can't do that." The manager looked uncomfortable. "I'm afraid I don't have the authority to search guests without clear evidence of wrongdoing." I was about to argue further when a commotion at the hostel's entrance caught our attention. 2 police officers walked in, accompanied by a disheveled and slightly bruised Klaus. "Klaus!" I exclaimed, jumping to my feet. "What happened to you?" Before he could answer, one of the officers spoke up. "We found this man wandering the streets disoriented. He says he's staying here and that someone drugged him and stole his wallet and phone." All eyes turned to Sarah, who had shrunk back into the couch, her face a mask of guilt and fear. "Empty your pockets," the night manager said, his voice now firm and brooking no argument. "Now." With shaking hands, Sarah reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a wallet, Klaus's wallet, and a small plastic bag containing several pills. The next few hours passed in a blur of police statements and hushed conversations with hostel management. It turned out Sarah was part of a small gang that targeted hostels, drugging solo travelers and robbing them while they were incapacitated. Klaus had been their intended victim that night, but when he'd proven more resistant to the drugs than expected and wandered off, Sarah had returned to the room to see if she could salvage the job by robbing me instead. As the sky began to lighten outside, I sat in the hostel's small kitchen, nursing a cup of strong coffee. Klaus, looking worse for wear but grateful to have his belongings back, sat across from me. "I can't thank you enough," he said, his voice still slightly slurred. "If you hadn't caught her..." I shook my head. "I'm just glad you're okay, and that they caught her before she could target anyone else." We sat in companionable silence for a while, both lost in our thoughts. Finally, Klaus spoke again. I almost stayed at a different hostel. The one next door had slightly better reviews." I couldn't help but laugh. Funny how things work out, isn't it? If you had, I might be the one stumbling around the streets of Bangkok right now. As other guests began to filter into the kitchen for breakfast, Klaus and I shared a look of understanding. In that moment, I realized that the unexpected connections, the shared experiences, even the dangers, was what traveling was all about. I'd come to Southeast Asia seeking adventure, and not even 48 hours in, I'd certainly found it. As I finished my coffee and headed back to my room to repack my thankfully intact backpack, I couldn't help but wonder what the rest of my journey would bring. One thing was certain. I'd definitely be using the lockers from now on. My stomach dropped as I rifled through my backpack for the 100th time. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not when I was so close to going home. Where is it? I muttered, appending the bag and scattering its contents across the threadbare Hostel bedspread. Clothes, toiletries, and souvenirs from my 3-month backpacking trip through Europe tumbled out. But the small blue booklet that was my ticket home was nowhere to be seen. I glanced at my watch, 3:17 a.m. My flight back to the States was at 10:30. How could my passport just vanish? Panic began to set in as I mentally retraced my steps through Lisbon. I'd used it to check into the hostel yesterday afternoon, so I knew I had it then. After that, I'd gone out for one last night of exploration, wandering the narrow streets of Alfama, drinking Vinho Verde at a tiny bar, and watching the sunset from a mirador overlooking the city. But I distinctly remembered tucking my passport safely back into its hidden pocket in my backpack before I left. I never took it out when I was exploring a city. That was backpacking 101. I took a deep breath, trying to quell the rising tide of anxiety. Okay, think, I said to myself. Where else could it be? My eyes darted around the small dorm room. My 5 roommates were all sound asleep, oblivious to my silent meltdown. Could one of them have taken it? I immediately felt guilty for the thought. They'd all seemed nice when we'd chatted earlier, swapping travel stories over beers in the common room. I tiptoed to the locker where I'd stashed my day pack and other valuables, hoping against hope that I'd absent-mindedly put the passport there instead. But a quick search yielded nothing but disappointment. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and Googled U.S. Embassy Lisbon. My heart sank as I read that they wouldn't open until 8 a.m. Even if I went there first thing, there was no way I'd make my flight. As quietly as I could, I gathered my scattered belongings and slipped out of the room. I needed space to think, to come up with a plan that didn't involve calling my parents and admitting I'd lost the most important document a traveler could have. The hostel's common room was deserted at this hour, lit only by the dim glow of exit signs. I sank into a worn leather couch, my mind racing. Maybe I'd dropped it somewhere in the city? But no! I was certain I hadn't taken it out. Could it have fallen out of my bag somehow? A horrible thought struck me. What if someone had stolen it while I was asleep? But wouldn't they have taken my other valuables too? As the panic threatened to overwhelm me, a new voice cut through the chaos in my head. Rough night. I looked up to see a guy about my age standing in the doorway. He was tall and lanky, with messy brown hair and the kind of tan you only get from months on the road. You could say that, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. He moved into the room, dropping his own backpack on a chair. I'm Tom. Just got in on the night bus from Porto. You, Lily, I said, and I'm supposed to be leaving for the airport in a few hours, but I trailed off, not wanting to admit my predicament to a stranger. Tom raised an eyebrow, but something in his easy manner made me want to confide in him. I can't find my passport, I blurted out. I know I had it yesterday, but now it's just gone. Instead of the pity or judgment I expected, Tom's face lit up with interest. Oh man, that's rough. But you know what? I bet we can find it. His confidence was both reassuring and baffling. How? I've looked everywhere. Tom grinned. Fresh eyes, new perspective. Plus, I've got nothing better to do until check-in time. Come on, let's retrace your steps. Before I knew it, we were headed back to my dorm room. Tom waited outside while I did one last thorough search, but the passport remained stubbornly missing. Next, we visited the front desk. The night manager, a sleepy-eyed guy named Miguel, was sympathetic but not very helpful. No one has turned in a passport, he said, but I can check the security cameras if you think it might have been stolen. 20 minutes later, we were huddled around a small monitor in the manager's office, watching grainy footage of the hallway outside my room. Hours of video yielded nothing suspicious. See, I said, dejected, it's hopeless. But Tom wasn't ready to give up. What about the common room? You said you were hanging out there last night, right? Back we went, combing every inch of the room. We looked under cushions, behind the ancient TV, even in the crevices of the foosball table. Nothing. As the sky outside began to lighten, despair settled over me like a heavy blanket. "It's no use," I said, slumping onto a chair. "I'm going to miss my flight, lose my job, and be stuck in Portugal forever." Tom sat down next to me. "Hey, it's not the end of the world. Embassies deal with this all the time. You'll get an emergency passport and be home in a few days." I knew he was right, but the thought of extending my trip under these circumstances just made me feel worse. I just don't understand how this could happen. I'm always so careful with my passport. "Walk me through yesterday one more time," Tom said. "Every detail you can remember." Sighing, I closed my eyes and pictured my arrival at the hostel. I checked in, went up to my room, put my backpack on the bed. I took out my passport to put it in the hidden pocket, but I froze, a memory suddenly surfacing. "Oh my God!" Tom leaned forward. What is it?" I got distracted, I said, the realization dawning on me. One of my roommates came in, and we started talking. I must have put the passport down on the bed instead of in my bag. In a flash, I was on my feet, racing back to the dorm room with Tom close behind. My roommates were starting to stir as I burst in, making a beeline for my bed. With trembling hands, I lifted the mattress, and there, stuck to the bottom with static cling, was my passport. The wave of relief that washed over me was so intense, I actually felt dizzy. I clutched the little blue book to my chest, laughing and crying at the same time. Tom appeared in the doorway, grinning from ear to ear. "Found it," I nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. As we walked back to the common room, the absurdity of the situation hit me. I'd spent hours searching the entire hostel, only to find my passport literally right under my nose the whole time. "I can't believe I put everyone through all that trouble," I said, embarrassment creeping in now that the panic had subsided. Tom shrugged. "Are you kidding? This is the most excitement I've had in weeks. Beats sitting around waiting for check-in time, that's for sure." We settled back onto the couch, the energy of our night-long search giving way to exhaustion. Outside, the first rays of sunlight were painting the Lisbon sky in shades of pink and gold. "So," Tom said, stifling a yawn, "still planning to catch that flight?" I looked at my watch. If I left now, I could just make it. But as I glanced around the hostel that had been the stage for this mini-drama, at Tom who'd spent his entire night helping a stranger, at the beautiful city just waking up outside, I felt a sudden reluctance to leave. "You know what?" I said, surprising myself. "I think I might stay a few more days." Tom's eyebrows shot up. "Really? After all that?" I nodded, a smile spreading across my face. "Yeah, I mean, I've got my passport now, so I can leave whenever I want. But I feel like I've only scratched the surface of what Lisbon has to offer. And who knows? Maybe I'll have another adventure." "Well," Tom said, holding out his hand, "in that case, welcome back to the world of the backpacker, Lily. Try not to lose your passport again, okay?" Laughing, I shook his hand. "Deal. And Tom, thanks for everything. I don't know what I would have done without you." As we sat there, watching the hostel come to life around us, I felt a renewed sense of excitement. My trip wasn't ending. It was just taking an unexpected detour. And isn't that, I thought, what traveling is really all about? I tucked my passport securely into my pocket, patting it once for good measure. This time, I wasn't letting it out of my sight. After all, you never know when you might need to make a quick getaway, or decide to stay just a little bit longer. I jolted awake, heart pounding, as my bare feet touched cold concrete. Blinking in confusion, I found myself standing on the rooftop of the hostel. The sprawling cityscape of Prague spread out before me in the pre-dawn light. A chill wind whipped around me, and I suddenly realized I was dressed only in a thin t-shirt and boxers. How did I get here? This wasn't the first time I'd woken up somewhere unexpected during my European backpacking trip, but it was definitely the most alarming. As I carefully made my way back to the roof access door, I tried to piece together what was happening to me. It had started 3 nights ago in Vienna. I'd woken up in the hostel's common room, curled up on a beanbag chair with no memory of how I'd gotten there. At the time, I'd written it off as a combination of jet lag and one too many local beers. But then it happened again in Budapest. This time, I'd found myself in the hostel's kitchen at 3 a.m., a half-prepared sandwich in front of me. When a bewildered night manager discovered me, I'd mumbled something about being hungry and skulked back to my dorm room, embarrassed and confused. Now here I was in Prague, 5 stories up and dangerously close to the roof's edge. This was getting out of hand. I tugged on the roof access door, but it didn't budge. Locked. Panic started to set in as I realized I was trapped up here, barely dressed, with no phone or key card. How long until someone found me? As if in answer to my unspoken question, I heard the scrape of the door opening behind me. I turned to see a girl about my age step onto the roof, her eyes widening in surprise when she saw me. "Oh," she exclaimed. I didn't think anyone else would be up here this early. I must have looked as bewildered and frightened as I felt, because her expression quickly changed to one of concern. "Are you okay?" she asked, taking a step closer. "You look a little lost." I think I've been sleepwalking," I admitted, my voice hoarse. The girl's eyebrows shot up. "Sleepwalking? All the way up here?" I nodded, wrapping my arms around myself as another gust of wind hit us. "I don't know how I got here. I just woke up a few minutes ago." "Jesus," she breathed. "That's scary. Here, take my sweater. You must be freezing." As she handed me her oversized hoodie, I caught a whiff of coffee. "I'm Mia, by the way," she said. "I come up here most mornings to watch the sunrise. It's usually pretty quiet." "I'm Jack," I replied, gratefully pulling on the hoodie. "And I promise I'm not usually in the habit of crashing people's sunrise watching sessions." Mia laughed, a warm sound that helped ease some of the tension I was feeling. "Well, since you're here, want to join me? I've got an extra cup of coffee in my thermos." Part of me wanted to race back to my room and hide under the covers, but something about Mia's easy manner made me want to stay. Plus, I wasn't entirely sure I could find my way back to my dorm in my current state. We settled on a bench near the edge of the roof, and Mia poured me a steaming cup of coffee. As the sky slowly lightened, painting the historic spires of Prague in soft pinks and golds, I found myself recounting the strange events of the past few nights. "It's never happened to me before this trip," I explained. "I don't know if it's stress or the unfamiliar environments or what, but it's starting to freak me out." Mia listened intently, her brow furrowed in thought. "Have you talked to any of your roommates about it? Maybe they've noticed something." I shook my head. I've been too embarrassed. Plus, I switch hostels every couple of days. I'm never in one place long enough to really get to know anyone. "Well," Mia said, a small smile playing at her lips, "you're talking to me about it, and I'm pretty sure this counts as getting to know someone." I couldn't help but laugh. Fair point. I guess near-death experiences on rooftops are a good icebreaker. As we chatted, I learned that Mia was a psychology student from Australia, taking a gap year to travel before starting grad school. When I mentioned my sleepwalking again, her eyes lit up with interest. "You know," she said, "I did a paper on parasomnia last semester. Sleepwalking is actually more common in adults than people think, especially during times of stress or in unfamiliar sleep environments." "That actually makes a lot of sense," I replied, thinking about how chaotic and disorienting constant travel could be. But how do I make it stop? I can't exactly keep waking up in random places. What if next time it's somewhere dangerous? Mia considered this for a moment. "Well, there are a few things you could try. Establishing a consistent sleep routine might help, even if you're changing locations, and reducing stress before bedtime. Maybe try some meditation or deep breathing exercises. It was solid advice, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. But why now? I've never had this problem before, even on other trips. Sometimes these things can be triggered by underlying anxieties or unresolved issues, Mia suggested gently. Is there anything weighing on your mind lately? Anything you've been avoiding dealing with? Her question hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. This trip had been my way of escaping a lot of things. A dead-end job, a messy breakup, the growing pressure from my parents to get serious about my future. I thought putting an ocean between me and my problems would help, but maybe I just brought them along in my subconscious. I said finally, I guess I've got some stuff to figure out. Mia nodded understandingly. Don't we all? Look, I know we just met, but if you want to talk more about it, I'm a pretty good listener. Occupational hazard of being a psych student, I guess. For the first time since waking up on the roof, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. Thanks, Mia. I might take you up on that. As the sun fully emerged over the horizon, bathing the city in warm light, we fell into comfortable conversation about our travels, our homes, and our dreams for the future. By the time other guests started trickling onto the roof, I felt like I'd known Mia for years instead of hours. We should probably head back down, Mia said eventually. You might want to put some pants on before the roof gets too crowded. I looked down at my boxers, having completely forgotten my state of undress. Oh, God, right. This isn't exactly the first impression I want to make on everyone. Mia laughed as we stood up. I don't know. It's certainly memorable. Come on, I'll walk you back to your room, just in case you have any residual sleepwalking tendencies. As we made our way through the hostel, I felt a mix of emotions: embarrassment at my situation, gratitude for Mia's kindness, and a strange sense of excitement about what this new day might bring. When we reached my dorm room, I turned to Mia. I really can't thank you enough for everything this morning. You pretty much saved me up there. She waved off my thanks with a smile. Don't mention it. But hey, a bunch of us are going on a walking tour of the city later. Want to join? I promise to keep you awake. I grinned, feeling more awake and alive than I had in weeks. You know what? I'd love to. As I watched Mia head off to her own room, I realized that for the first time since starting this trip, I was actually looking forward to what the day might bring. Maybe my sleepwalking adventure had been my subconscious's way of pushing me to confront the things I'd been running from, to actually engage with the world around me instead of just passing through it. I slipped into my room, careful not to wake my still sleeping roommates, and started getting ready for the day. As I dressed, I made a mental note to look into those meditation techniques Mia had mentioned, and maybe I thought it was time to start dealing with the issues I'd left behind at home. But first, I had a city to explore and a new friend to get to know. Who knew where this unexpected detour might lead? For once, I was excited to find out. As I left the room, I took one last look at my bed, the place where this strange adventure had begun. No more midnight trips, I whispered to myself. At least, not unless I'm awake to enjoy them. With that, I stepped out into the hostel hallway, ready to embrace whatever this new day and this new chapter of my journey might bring. The bed across from mine was empty, sheets undisturbed. Emma's backpack still leaned against the wall, her phone charger dangling from the outlet. But Emma herself was nowhere to be seen. Have you guys seen Emma? I asked, poking my head into the hostel's common room. A couple of backpackers looked up from their phones, shaking their heads. Who's Emma? One of them asked. I blinked, confused. My roommate, tall, red hair, Australian accent you can hear from a mile away. She checked in with me yesterday. The backpackers exchanged glances. Sorry, the other one said. We've been here for 3 days and haven't seen anyone fitting that description. A chill ran down my spine as I retreated from the common room. How could they not remember Emma? She'd been the life of the party last night, regaling everyone with stories of her misadventures in Amsterdam. I made my way to the front desk, where a bored-looking guy was scrolling through his phone. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep the growing panic out of my voice. "I'm looking for my roommate, Emma. She seems to have disappeared." The desk clerk raised an eyebrow. "Emma? I'm sorry, but you don't have a roommate. You checked into a private room yesterday." My mouth fell open. "What? No! That's impossible. I specifically booked a shared room. Emma and I checked in together." He turned to his computer, tapping a few keys. "I'm looking at your reservation right now. Single occupancy 1 night. Are you feeling okay? Did you maybe have a bit too much to drink last night?" I shook my head vehemently. "No, I'm fine. This doesn't make any sense." Retreating from the desk, I pulled out my phone, scrolling frantically through my photos. There had to be some evidence of Emma's existence. We'd taken selfies together at dinner last night. I was sure of it. But as I flipped through my gallery, my heart sank. There were plenty of photos from my trip, but none of them included Emma. No selfies, no group shots from the hostel, nothing. I slumped against the wall, my mind reeling. Was I going crazy? Had I imagined Emma entirely? No, that was impossible. I remembered her vividly. Her loud laugh, the way she'd snorted when she found something particularly funny, the smell of her coconut shampoo. You couldn't imagine a person in that much detail, could you? Desperate for some kind of confirmation, I hurried back to my room. Emma's backpack was still there, a bright blue osprey that stood out against the drab hostel walls. With shaking hands, I unzipped it, feeling like an intruder but needing to find some proof of her existence. Inside, I found nothing. The bag was completely empty. I sank onto my bed, head in my hands. What the hell was going on? A knock at the door made me jump. "Come in," I called out, half hoping it would be Emma, back from wherever she disappeared to. Instead, a tall guy with dreadlocks poked his head in. "Hey," he said. "The guy at the desk said you were looking for someone. I'm heading out, but I thought I'd check if you needed any help." I looked up at him, desperation clawing at my insides. Yes, my roommate Emma. She's missing, and no one seems to remember her. I feel like I'm going insane. The guy, his name Tag Red Kai, stepped fully into the room, his brow furrowed. "That sounds pretty freaky. When did you last see her?" "Last night," I said. "We went to dinner, then came back here and hung out in the common room. I swear she was here when I went to bed." Kai nodded thoughtfully. "Okay, let's think this through. You said no one remembers her, right? But her stuff is still here." I gestured to the empty backpack. "Well, her bag is here, but it's empty. And the desk clerk insists I checked into a private room, but I know that's not true." Kimu said, "This might sound weird, but are you sure Emma was real?" I bristled at the suggestion. Of course she was real. I'm not hallucinating. Kai held up his hands placatingly. "I'm not saying you are, but maybe there's another explanation. Like, have you ever heard of the Mandela effect?" I shook my head, and Kai continued. "It's this phenomenon where a large group of people collectively misremember something. Like, people swear they remember Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 80s, even though he actually died in 2013. But this isn't a collective misremembering," I protested. "It's just me. Everyone else seems to think Emma never existed." "True," Kai conceded. "But what if you've somehow slipped into a parallel universe? One where you never met Emma?" I stared at him, trying to decide if he was messing with me, but his expression was entirely serious. That's insane," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, a part of me wondered, was it any more insane than a person vanishing into thin air, leaving no trace behind? Kaisrugit, maybe, but think about it. You remember Emma vividly, but there's no physical evidence she was ever here. No one else remembers her. Even your reservation is different than you remember. It's like you're remembering a different version of events." I fell silent, turning the idea over in my mind. It was completely bizarre, but was it any more bizarre than what was happening? Okay, I said slowly. Let's say, hypothetically, that you're right. That somehow I've... What? Shifted realities? How do I get back? How do I find Emma? Kai sat down on the empty bed, Emma's bed, his face thoughtful. I'm not sure, but maybe we can try to retrace your steps? Go through everything you did yesterday. See if we can find the point where things diverged. It was crazy, beyond crazy, but I was out of options and rapidly running out of sanity. All right, I said, let's do it. For the next few hours, Kai and I went over every minute detail of the previous day. We walked the route Emma and I had taken to the restaurant, revisited the common room, even tried to recreate the exact position I'd been in when I fell asleep. But nothing changed. Emma remained stubbornly absent, and my memories remained at odds with everyone else's reality. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the hostel courtyard, I felt the last of my hopes slipping away. It's no use, I said, slumping onto a bench. Either I'm crazy, or Emma really is just gone. Kai sat next to me, his expression sympathetic. I am sorry, man. I really thought we might be onto something. We sat in silence for a while, watching other travelers come and go. I couldn't help but wonder how many of them had stories like mine. How many had lost someone between one reality and the next? You know, Kai said eventually, maybe it doesn't matter if Emma was real in this reality or not. She was real to you. Those memories, those experiences, they happened for you. Maybe that's what's important. I turned his words over in my mind. He had a point. Whether Emma had been flesh and blood or some kind of interdimensional glitch, the impact she'd had on me was undeniable. The laughs we'd shared, the stories we'd swapped, those were real, at least to me. Yeah, I said softly. Maybe you're right. As if on cue, a group of backpackers burst into the courtyard, their laughter echoing off the walls. Among them was a tall girl with fiery red hair, her Australian accent carrying across the space. My heart leapt into my throat. Emma? I called out, jumping to my feet. The girl turned, her smile faltering slightly as she saw me. Sorry, mate, she said. I think you've got me confused with someone else. I'm Zoya Kropka. My hope deflated as quickly as it had risen. Right. My mistake. As the group moved on, Kai placed a hand on my shoulder. You okay? I took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. Yeah, I think I am. And surprisingly, I meant it. Maybe Emma was gone, lost to another reality, or maybe never having existed at all. But the experience of losing her, of questioning my own memories and sanity, had changed me. It had opened my eyes to the fragility of reality, to the infinite possibilities that might exist just beyond our perception. As Kai and I headed back into the hostel, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, what version of reality I might wake up in. But for the first time since this bizarre adventure began, I was excited to find out. After all, in a world where roommates could vanish and realities could shift, anything was possible. And isn't that, I thought, what travel is all about? Stepping into the unknown, embracing the unexpected, and coming out the other side forever changed. I may have lost Emma, but I'd gained a new perspective, and maybe, just maybe, a glimpse into the vast, mysterious workings of the universe. As I climbed into bed that night, I whispered a quiet thank you to Emma, wherever and whatever she might be. Then I closed my eyes, ready to see what new adventures and what new realities tomorrow might bring. The first scream pierced the air just as I was about to take a bite of my paella. Across the hostel's crowded dining room, a young woman collapsed, her body convulsing violently on the floor. Before anyone could react, Another traveler stumbled from his chair, clutching his stomach and retching uncontrollably. Chaos erupted around me as more guests began to fall ill. The rich aroma of saffron and seafood that had filled the air moments ago was now tainted with the acrid smell of vomit and fear. I dropped my fork, my appetite vanishing instantly. What the hell was happening? Everyone remained calm. The hostel owner, a portly man named Javier, shouted over the growing panic. "Please, stay where you are. We're calling for medical assistance." But calm was the last thing on anyone's mind. People were scrambling to get away from their tables, some trying to help those who had fallen ill, others simply trying to escape. I watched in horror as a guy I'd chatted with earlier, Tim from Australia, collapsed mid-stride, his face turning an alarming shade of gray. My mind raced. Food poisoning? But how could it hit so many people so quickly? And why wasn't I affected? I glanced down at my untouched plate, then at the half-eaten meals around me. A chill ran down my spine as a terrible thought occurred to me. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. As if reading my thoughts, Javier's voice boomed out again. "Lock the doors. No one leaves until the authorities arrive." The remaining staff scrambled to secure the exits, their faces pale with shock and fear. Trapped. We were all trapped in here with whatever had caused this. I stood up, my legs shaky but holding. Around me, people were crying, shouting for help, or simply staring in stunned silence at the chaos unfolding before them. The din of sirens growing louder outside added to the cacophony. A hand grabbed my arm, and I spun around to find Elena, one of the hostel's cooks, her dark eyes wide with panic. "You," she said, her accent thick with urgency. "You're not sick. Come with me now." Before I could protest, she was dragging me towards the kitchen. As we burst through the swinging doors, the relative quiet hit me like a physical force. The kitchen was deserted. Pots still simmering on the stove, half-chopped vegetables abandoned on cutting boards. "What's going on?" I demanded, pulling my arm free from Elena's grip. "What happened out there?" Elena ran a shaky hand through her hair. "I don't know. It's impossible. We follow every safety protocol. Our food, it cannot be contaminated like this." "Then what?" I pressed. "Because that," I gestured towards the dining room, "is not normal food poisoning." She shook her head, her eyes darting around the kitchen as if searching for answers among the gleaming pots and pans. "No, it's not. It's Madre de Dios. I think it must be poison." The word hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. "Poison?" I repeated. "But who would dash?" My question was cut short by the sound of retching. We both turned to see Marco, the new kitchen assistant, hunched over a trash can in the corner. He looked up at us, his young face twisted in pain and fear. "Help me!" He gasped before another wave of nausea overtook him. Elena rushed to his side, murmuring soothing words in rapid Spanish. I stood frozen, my mind whirling. Marco had been fine just moments ago when we'd passed him, which meant the poisoner is still active. I said aloud, the realization hitting me like a punch to the gut. Elena's head snapped up, her eyes meeting mine in shared horror. "But who? Why?" Before I could respond, the kitchen door burst open. Javier stormed in, his face a mask of fury and fear. "What have you done?" he roared, advancing on Elena. "How could you let this happen?" Elena straightened up, her chin jutting out defiantly despite the tears in her eyes. "I have done nothing. Our food is safe, I swear it." "Safe?" Javier spat. "There are 20 people out there who would disagree. The police are on their way, and they will dash." "It wasn't the food," I interjected, stepping between them. "At least, not all of it. Marco just got sick right in front of us. Someone is still poisoning people right now." Javier's anger deflated, replaced by confusion and dawning dread. "But how? Who?" A groan from Marco drew our attention. Elena knelt beside him again, checking his pulse. His heart is racing, she said, her voice tight with worry. We need to get him help. Javier nodded, some of his authority returning. I'll send someone in, but we need to figure this out before more people get hurt. You, he pointed at me. You're not sick. Why? I shrugged helplessly. I hadn't started eating yet when it all kicked off. Just luck, I guess. Luck. Javier repeated, his tone bitter. At least someone is having some today. A commotion from the dining room drew our attention. Through the small window in the kitchen door, I could see paramedics had arrived and were tending to the sick guests. But something else caught my eye. A figure moving purposely between the tables, leaning over plates and glasses. There, I exclaimed, pointing. Someone's out there, doing something to the food and drinks. Javier squinted through the window. I can't see. Wait, is that Jorge? What is he doing? Before anyone could stop me, I pushed through the door back into the dining room. The scene that greeted me was like something out of a disaster movie. Paramedics in bright vests moved between prone bodies, while those still standing huddled in small groups, fear etched on every face. And there, just a few tables away, was Jorge, the quiet guy who'd been working the bar all evening. He was leaning over an abandoned glass of sangria, his hand poised above it. Hey! I shouted, startling him. Jorge's head snapped up, his eyes meeting mine. For a moment, we both froze. Then he bolted. Without thinking, I gave chase. Jorge weaved between tables and overturned chairs, heading for the hostel's back exit. I followed, my heart pounding in my ears. As we burst out into the warm Barcelona night, I could hear shouts behind us, but I kept my eyes fixed on Jorge's retreating figure. The narrow streets of the Gothic Quarter became a blur as we ran. Jorge was fast, but desperation lent speed to my feet. As we rounded a corner, I saw my chance. A stack of empty crates stood against a wall. With a burst of speed, I grabbed one and hurled it at Jorge's legs. He went down hard, sprawling across the cobblestones. Before he could recover, I was on him, pinning him to the ground. Why? I gasped, struggling to catch my breath. Why did you do it? Jorge didn't answer, but the look in his eyes, a mixture of fear and something darker, almost manic, chilled me to the bone. Footsteps approached, and suddenly Javier was there, along with 2 police officers. As they hauled Jorge to his feet, I saw something fall from his pocket. A small vial filled with clear liquid. One of the officers picked it up, his face grim. We'll need to get this analyzed immediately, he said. Good work catching him. You may have saved lives tonight. As Jorge was led away in handcuffs, the adrenaline that had been fueling me began to ebb. The full weight of what had just happened crashed over me. I slumped against the cool stone wall, my legs suddenly weak. Javier approached, his earlier anger replaced by a mix of gratitude and exhaustion. Thank you, he said simply. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't spotted him. I nodded, too drained to speak. As we made our way back to the hostel, my mind was a whirlwind of questions. What had driven Jorge to do this? How many people had been hurt? Would the hostel, would any of us, ever recover from this night? The street outside the hostel was now filled with ambulances and police cars, their lights painting the ancient buildings in surreal flashes of red and blue. As paramedics rushed past with stretchers, I caught glimpses of familiar faces, fellow travelers I'd shared drinks and stories with just hours ago. This wasn't how the night was supposed to go. This wasn't what traveling was about. But as I watched the efficient movements of the emergency responders, saw hostel staff comforting shaken guests, I realized something. Even in the darkest moments, people could come together. Strangers could become allies. And sometimes, the most unexpected experiences could teach us the most about ourselves and the world. As a police officer approached to take my statement, I took a deep breath. This wasn't the Barcelona adventure I'd imagined, but it was the one I'd gotten. And somehow, I knew I'd never forget this night, or the people I'd shared it with, for as long as I lived.